Let's recall some great men who's been fighting for our rights. Let's recall some great men who's been fighting for our rights. Let's recall some great men who's been fighting for our rights. Let's recall some great men who's been fighting for our rights. Recall Bob Marley, who's been fighting for our rights. Recall Rodney.
The African continent have had great leaders. Some were celebrated and some were not. Many unsung African heroes have died without Africans recognizing their greatness. Meet our unsung hero of the day. Only on African Eyes Radio, your revolutionary radio. John Chilembwe, born in June 1871, was a Baptist pastor, educator, and a revolutionary who trained as a minister in the United States of America. After he returned to Nyasaland in the 1900s, John Chilembwe became an early figure in the resistance to colonialism in the then Nyasaland, the modern-day Malawi, opposing both the treatment of Africans working in the fields of European-owned plantations and also the colonial government's failure to promote the social and political advancement of Africans. Soon after the outbreak of the First World War, Chilembwe organized an unsuccessful armed uprising against the colonial rule. In this present time, Chilembwe is celebrated as a hero of independence, and his day is observed annually on the 15th of January in Malawi. In the year of 1892, John Chilembwe became a house servant of Joseph Booth. Booth was a radical and independent-minded white missionary who came to Africa in the same year, 1892, as a Baptist to establish the Zambezi Industrial Mission near Blantyre. Joseph Booth became very critical of the reluctance of the Scottish Presbyterian missions to admit Africans as full church members, and later he founded 7 more independent missions in Nyasaland, which, like the Zambezi Industrial Mission, focused on the equality of all worshippers. In Booth's household and mission, where he was closely associated with Booth, Chilembwe became acquainted with Booth's radical religious ideas and egalitarian feelings. Joseph Booth left Nyasaland with John Chilembwe in 1897 and returned to Nyasaland alone in 1899 before leaving permanently in 1902 and continued to correspond with John Chilembwe. In 1897, Booth and Chilembwe traveled together to the United States of America. because of the difficulties the two encountered when traveling together in the United States. Both introduced Chilembwe to the Reverend Louis G. Gordon, Foreign Missions Secretary of the National Baptist Convention, who arranged for John Chilembwe to attend the Virginia Theological Seminary and College, now Virginia University of Lynchburg, a small Baptist institution at Lynchburg, Virginia, where he almost studied African American history. The principal was a militantly independent Negro, Gregory Hayes. Both experienced the contemporary prejudice against Negroes and was exposed to the radical American Negro ideas in the works of John Brown, Booker T. Washington, Frederick Douglass, and others. He was ordained as a Baptist minister at Lynchburg in 1899. After completing his studies at Lynchburg in 1900, he returned to Nyasaland in the same year with the blessings of the Foreign Missions Board and financial assistance from the National Baptist Convention. During the first 12 years of his ministry after his return to Nyasaland, Chilembwe encouraged African self-respect and advancement through education, hard work and personal responsibility as advocated by Booker T. Washington. His activities were initially supported by the white Protestant missionaries, although his relationship with Catholic missions were less friendly. In his own words, to labor amongst his benighted race, Chilembwe, upon his return, backed financially by the National Baptist Convention of America, which also provided him with 2 American Baptist helpers until 1906. The graduated Reverend John Chilembwe started his Providence Industrial Mission PIM in Chiladzuru district in the southern part of what is now called Malawi. In its first decade, the mission developed slowly, assisted by regular small donations from his American backers, and Chilembwe founded several schools, which by the year 1912 had 1,000 pupils and 800 adult students. He preached the values of hard work, self-respect, and self-help to his congregation, and although as early as 1905 he used his church position to deplore the condition of Africans in the British protectorate of the then Nyasaland. By 1912 or 1913, Chilembwe had become more politically militant and openly voiced criticisms over the state of African land rights in the Shire Highlands and of the conditions of labor tenants, particularly on the Alexander Law Bruce estate, owned by Alexander Law Bruce, son-in-law of Dr. David Livingstone. This may have influenced his decision to initiate an armed uprising in 1915. There is a very little direct evidence of what Chilembwe preached, although at least in his first decade in Nyasaland, his main message was of African advancement through Christianity and hard work. In the Shire Highlands, the most densely populated part of the then Nyasaland, where European estates occupied about 867,000 acres, which is over 350,000 hectares, with almost half of it being the best arable land. Relatively few local Africans remained on the estate when the owners introduced labor rents, preferring to settle on the crown land where customary law entitled them to use the land belonging to the community or to become migrant workers. However, planters with large areas of available land but limited to labor could engage immigrants from Mozambique who had no right to use the community land on terms that Nyasaland Africans found them unacceptable. These people were called Anguru, a convenient term with derogatory implications employed by Europeans to describe a number of different peoples who originated in Mozambique but had migrated into Nyasaland, mostly speaking one of the Makua languages, often the Lomwe language, who themselves used various names to refer to their places of origin. They left Mozambique in large numbers from 1899 when a harsh new labor code was introduced in 1912. Conditions on the estates where the Anguru became tenants were generally poor, and Africans both on the estates and also the crown lands were subjected to an increase in tax despite food shortages. Chilembwe's Providence Industrial Mission was situated in an area dominated by the Magomero estate of Alexander Law Bruce Estate, named after a son-in-law of Dr. David Livingstone. From 1906, the Bruce Estates developed and started to plant a hardy variety of cotton suitable for the Shire Highlands. Cotton required intensive labor over a long growing period, and the estate manager William Jervis Livingstone, reputed to be a distant relative of Dr. David Livingstone, ensured that 5,000 workers were available on the Magomero estate throughout that 5 or 6 month period by exploiting the obligations of the migrant labor tenancy system called Tangata system. Alexander Livingstone Bruce, who controlled the A.L. Bruce estate, instructed Livingstone not to allow any mission work to be carried out on or schools to be opened on the Bruce estates, although the company provided free medical and hospital treatment for workers. Alexander Livingstone Bruce held the considered view that educated Africans had no place in colonial society, and he opposed their education. He also recorded his personal dislike for Chilembwe as an educated African. He considered all African-led churches were centers for agitation and prohibited their church to be built on the Magomero estate. Although this prohibition applied to all missions, Chilembwe's mission was the closest. It became a natural focus for African agitation, and Chilembwe became the spokesman for African tenants on the Bruce estates. Chilembwe provoked confrontation by erecting churches on the estate land, which Livingstone burned down because he considered them as centers of agitation against the management and because they made potential claims on estate land. Chilembwe was angered by the Livingstones' refusal to accept the worth of African people, and also frustrated by the refusal of the settlers and government to provide suitable opportunities or a political voice to the African new men who had been educated by the Presbyterian and other missions in Nyasaland, or in some cases had received a higher education abroad. A number of such men became Chilembwe's lieutenants in the Chilembwe Uprising. A month later, in January 1915, Chilembwe decided to strike a blow and die. In his own words, "For our blood will surely mean something at last." This was the only way to show the white man that the treatment they are treating our men and women was most bad, and we have determined to strike a first and a last blow and then all die by the heavy storm of the white man's army. These were his last marching orders. He spoke to his 200 followers and warned them not to molest white women. On January 23, in different attacks, his men beheaded Livingstone, killed 2 other white men and several Africans, while sparing a number of white women and children, looted an ammunition store in a large nearby town, and retreated to pray. When the rising failed to arouse local support, Chilembwe fled towards Mozambique, unarmed, wearing a dark blue coat, a striped pajama jacket over a colored shirt, and a grey flannel trouser. He was killed by African soldiers on February the 3rd, 1915. Chilembwe is revered as a hero in modern Malawi, which achieved independence in 1964. He was Malawi's first serious protester against colonial rule and the first to shatter the widespread imperial belief that the natives were happy under foreign domination. John Chilembwe, another net turner in our black history books, a villain to others, but to us a freedom fighter.
patenga mwana tawa kazi wanga
John mamuna wanga azunga kupa John ine ndisala ndiya John
pano palinkani tango kanisani inuyo pamene muli nupo muli mula mulelo wa samunda kupeza kuti hinu mukuyenda momangika mosamasuka ndipo wena mukukwina mubinda yawo mulamulilidwa kugwina maulesi kungozindikila nkhonya vili mutu kutidwa mukanafila mbwa tiyenela kuti titokose kwa John Chilembwe yemwe wadata ya moyo wache kale kale lelo tilikuyenda tilinyangwa nyangwa tilipe chifukwa cha iye mene adayambilila kutimenyela ditundendele ndiwufulu maulele yekupempha kwa hambo yekuti nzeku wake use mundendele haida nunga kalola haida mwina nkuteka tisaona naso haida bakali pano patenga mwana tawa kazi wanga
John mamuna wanga azunga kupa John ine ndisala ndiya John
haida nunga kalola haida mwina nkuteka tisaona naso haida bakali pano patenga mwana tawa kazi wanga
John mamuna wanga azunga kupa John ine ndisala ndiya John
haida nunga kalola haida mwina nkuteka tisaona naso haida bakali pano patenga mwana tawa kazi wanga
John mamuna wanga azunga kupa John ine ndisala ndiya John
yapa makamaka tiyenela kumvesa Chilembwe hadalolela kukesa mwazi chifukwa cha ifetosa Malawi hamuna ndiya kazi why Black Raiders of Africa shut them bang tribute to the Black Raider Chilembwe me I go rise a peace minister there's nothing you can stop me fi sing this song Rika children smile Rika children jump Konda de wina ndinzake nwabare Kona ni Chilembwe iyadale muntu wa mpamvu Komano sopano eno ndintawi yotisonge wino Hofolo Haida Numba kalola haida nkuteka tisaona naso haida bakali pano patenga mwana tawa kazi wanga
John mamuna wanga azunga kupa John ine ndisala ndiya John
haida nunga kalola haida mwina nkuteka tisaona naso haida bakali pano patenga mwana tawa kazi wanga
John mamuna wanga azunga kupa John ine ndisala ndiya John
haida nunga kalola haida mwina nkuteka tisaona naso haida bakali pano patenga mwana tawa kazi wanga
John mamuna wanga azunga kupa John ine ndisala ndiya John